Daniel came to her room again, but this time, there was no hesitation. He climbed into bed beside her, wrapping his arms around her. It wasn't just the embrace of a mother and son. It felt like something much deeper, a connection that transcended the ordinary. As she listened to his heartbeat, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Whatever this was, whatever it had become, she was ready for it. Daniel and she had always shared a close bond, but now they were something more, partners in a connection that defied convention. As she drifted off to sleep, a smile spread across her face. It felt crazy, yet it also felt incredible, as if they were embarking on a new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, understanding, and a bond that would carry them forward into the unknown. On a tranquil Friday night in a cozy suburban neighborhood, the air was crisp and the stars twinkled like scattered diamonds against the dark sky. Inside a modest two-story home, the soft hum of silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant sound of crickets outside. The living room, with its well-worn couch and family photos adorning the walls, had witnessed countless moments of joy and sorrow. After a long, demanding week, the weary single mother, Sarah, finally found herself enveloped in an unusual calm. She longed for the embrace of sleep, hoping nothing would disturb the peace that had settled over her home. For 8 years, life had been a tumultuous roller coaster since her divorce. Sarah and her ex-husband had parted ways amicably, but raising her son Daniel alone had been both a challenge and a reward. He was her world, smart, funny, and kind-hearted. As she made her way to her bedroom, the familiar creaks of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet felt like an old friend. That night, exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and she barely managed to slip into her pajamas before collapsing into bed. The house was still. Daniel had retreated to his room earlier, lost in the virtual realms of his video games and the demands of homework. Snuggling under the fluffy blanket, she felt its warmth wrap around her like a comforting hug, a welcome reprieve from the world outside. Life had finally calmed down after a tough year filled with emotional ups and downs, and she felt fortunate to have Daniel by her side, even as he approached adulthood. In the dim light of her room, shadows danced on the walls and her thoughts began to drift, reflecting on the bond she and Daniel had forged. They had shared so much after his father's departure, and despite the challenges, they had crafted a good life in their little oasis. Just as Sarah began to drift off, a soft knock at her bedroom door pulled her back to reality. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was quiet, cutting through the silence like a gentle breeze. She blinked, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep and focus on the door, where his silhouette stood framed by the hallway light. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice still thick with slumber. Daniel hesitated before stepping into the room, quietly closing the door behind him. He looked down, a hint of sadness shadowing his features, and the sight tugged at her heart. I couldn't sleep," he admitted, standing near her bed. Her heart sank. Something was clearly bothering him. Since the divorce, he had struggled with sleep occasionally, but rarely opened up about it. She knew he was hurting, even if he hid it well. "Come here," she said softly, patting the spot beside her. "You can stay with me tonight if you want." He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the door, but then he moved closer, lying down beside her, facing her in the dim light. She could see how tired he looked, an unusual vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," he replied, pushing his dark hair away from his eyes. "I just wanted to be close to you." A warmth spread through her at those words. It had been a long time since he had sought comfort like this, reminiscent of when he was a little boy. She smiled and brushed his hair back, feeling grateful for this moment of connection. "That's okay," she whispered, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You can stay as long as you need." He smiled back, but she detected the shadows lingering in his gaze. Choosing not to push him further, they lay there in silence, wrapped in the blanket, allowing the quiet to settle around them. As Daniel's breathing slowed, she thought he had fallen asleep, but then he spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "Mom, do you ever miss him?" His question caught her off guard, like a sudden chill in the warm room. She knew he was talking about his father, a topic she had skirted around for years. "I do sometimes," she admitted quietly. "But things weren't good between us. You know that." He nodded slowly, searching her face for answers. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" A heavy sigh escaped her lips as she thought of all the regrets that lingered like ghosts in the corners of her mind. "Maybe, but we can't change what happened. We have to move forward." He looked down at the blanket, fiddling with its edge. "I guess I just wonder if I could have done something different, like if I had been better." His words pierced her heart like a tiny dagger. She turned to face him, her voice firm yet gentle. "Daniel, this wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." He looked away, his voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes it feels like, if I had been better, maybe Dad wouldn't have left." Tears welled in her eyes as she pulled him into a tight hug. He resisted for a moment, but then he melted into her, burying his face in her shoulder. "Listen to me," she said, her voice trembling. "Your dad made his own choices. It had nothing to do with you. You've always been more than enough for me." She felt him nod against her shoulder, but she could still sense the tension in him, the weight of unspoken pain and guilt. They held each other closely, the silence between them becoming a soothing balm. Gradually he relaxed, his breathing deepening as he drifted off to sleep. However, as he slept beside her, her mind raced with thoughts and memories. The sound of laughter at the park, the warmth of summer days spent playing soccer in the yard, the fading echoes of a family once whole. Amidst that peaceful embrace, a strange feeling stirred within her. It was a warmth spreading through her chest, a connection that felt deeper than the typical bond between a mother and son. She tried to ignore it and focus on his rhythmic breathing, but the feeling persisted, refusing to be silenced. Morning arrived too soon, the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains, casting a golden hue across the room. She watched Daniel sleep, his face serene and relaxed, the tension from the night before seemingly forgotten. A swell of love and pride filled her heart, yet that unfamiliar feeling lingered, a gentle tug in her heart that she couldn't shake. Carefully, she slipped out of bed and made her way downstairs to the kitchen, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee greeted her like an old friend. The familiar routine of cooking offered comfort, but her thoughts kept drifting back to their late-night conversation. Daniel had always been sensitive, but she hadn't fully realized how much his father's absence had affected him. She wished she could ease the guilt he carried, but the warmth she had felt while holding him nagged at her, a reminder that their relationship was shifting. Soon, Daniel emerged from his slumber, his hair tousled and his youthful frame still evident in his pajamas. Yet there was a newfound maturity in his eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. She greeted him with a warm smile, trying to mask the emotions that lingered from the night before. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, placing a plate of pancakes before him, the syrup glistening like morning dew. "Morning," he mumbled, eagerly digging in. They ate in comfortable silence, the morning light casting a warm glow over the kitchen, illuminating the memories that lingered on the walls. Occasionally she caught him looking at her, a mix of gratitude and something deeper flickering in his gaze. But she didn't want to disrupt the fragile peace they had found. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice filled with sincerity. "Thanks for last night, Mom. I needed that." "You never have to thank me, Daniel. I'll always be here for you," she replied, her heart swelling with affection. He nodded, but his gaze lingered on her, a silent question hanging in the air. She wasn't sure how to respond to the subtle shift in their relationship. The intensity in his eyes held a depth that felt unfamiliar. Yet it resonated within her, echoing the unspoken feelings that had begun to blossom. After breakfast, Daniel returned to his room, lost in homework and video games, while she busied herself with chores around the house. Yet the atmosphere between them had changed, charged with a quiet tension and unspoken acknowledgement of the deeper connection that had emerged. As evening rolled in and the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, her thoughts returned to Daniel and their shared closeness. It was becoming increasingly clear that her feelings for him had evolved beyond mere maternal love. That night after dinner, they settled onto the couch in the living room, the flickering lights of the television casting a soft glow around them. With the aroma of popcorn lingering in the air, she became acutely aware of how close they were sitting. His arm brushed against hers, causing her heart to race. She tried to focus on the film, but the tension between them was palpable. Halfway through, Daniel shifted closer, and this time, he didn't pull away. She glanced at him, and their eyes locked, a moment suspended in time. In that instant, the emotions they had been trying to suppress surged to the surface. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. He squeezed it gently, tracing circles on her palm, sending flutters through her heart. They sat there for a while, hands intertwined, silently acknowledging the shift in their relationship. Uncertainty loomed about what the future held, but she felt a sense of certainty that things were changing. Daniel was no longer just her son. He was someone she cared for deeply in a way she couldn't fully define. As the movie ended, they remained on the couch, lost in their thoughts, the world outside fading away. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I'm really glad you're here," he whispered, and she felt the same. That night, Daniel came to her room again, but this time, there was no hesitation. He climbed into bed beside her, wrapping his arms around her. It wasn't just the embrace of a mother and son. It felt like something much deeper, a connection that transcended the ordinary. As she listened to his heartbeat, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Whatever this was, whatever it had become, she was ready for it. Daniel and she had always shared a close bond, but now they were something more, partners in a connection that defied convention. As she drifted off to sleep, a smile spread across her face. It felt crazy, yet it also felt incredible, as if they were embarking on a new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, understanding, and a bond that would carry them forward into the unknown.